So, when I decided to leave my marriage, and one of the first things I thought of was beyond the obvious of my children, was what about my beloved animals, such as my dog Blue and my cat Simone?
In certain circles is as the awareness of pet custody becomes something that people are talking about more. There's a real humanizing of the dog that's happening at the same time. So this sort of like, well, the dog is just it's your other child, the fur children, which is very sweet, huge, enormous grief, and on multiple levels. Because for some people, it might be saying goodbye to the animal, and for a lot of people, saying goodbye to the animal also means the relationship is really over. And what a dog will look like when it's not okay is you will see changes in its behavior. Like maybe they start losing their appetite. If you write down together and you agree, and you can download forms online where they're sort of have all the framework written out for you, but that you have something written down that says, if we split up, the dog is going with this person or the cat is going with this person. If you're going through a breakup, have the conversation about the dog or the cat as soon as possible. Don't leave it till the end.
Welcome to the Just Separated podcast. Hi, I'm Karen Oman, a thanatologist, grief counselor, divorce strategist, and co-author of the Just Separated workbook. I draw on years of personal and professional experience to guide you through the challenges of your divorce. Together, with our expert guests, we'll equip you with the clarity, resilience, and tools to take charge and move forward with confidence. Follow Just Separated and join us as we explore the many different facets of divorce. Welcome to the Just Separate podcast. I'm your host, Karen Oman, co-founder of the Divorce Workshop. Today we're going to talk about who keeps the dog, pet custody, and divorce challenges. Our expert guest is Karis Nafte. Karis is the founder of Who Keeps a Dog, Pet Custody Mediation, offering specialized guidance in pet custody disputes during divorce using her expertise as a certified dog behavioral consultant and accredited family mediator. As a leading expert, she authored Who Keeps the Dog, Navigating Pet Custody During Divorce, and creating a training program to equip dog professionals to support divorcing individuals. She frequently speaks on pet custody for legal and mediation organizations and has been featured in numerous prominent outlets. She prioritizes animal well-being and offers a blend of animal behavioral and legal understanding to provide expert mediation in these sensitive situations. Welcome to the Just Separate podcast.
Thank you for having me, Karen. I'm happy to be here.
So when I decided to leave my marriage, and one of the first things I thought of was beyond the obvious of my children was what about my beloved animals, such as my dog Blue and my cat Simone? And I have since learned that I'm not alone in that concern, that the more and more families are facing the same issues, and it's much bigger and more emotional part of divorce than I realized, and even some of my clients have realized. So why do you think the question of who keeps the dog or the cat or the horse or whatever has become such a growing and emotionally loaded part of divorce?
That is such a wonderful question. And I think there's many layers to the answer. I think in recent years, we can kind of all agree that culturally, animals are sort of have changed their role for a lot of families. They have become very central to a lot of families. I think certainly there's certain couples who opt not to have children and consciously choose to have pet children instead, and are quite proud of that, and have no don't feel. I think historically it was weird if you said, no, I don't want children, I just want dogs, and nowadays it's quite normal. That's the position that a lot of people choose for their life. So I think because there is now such a different sense of care and love and place that animals hold in our heart, that was just different than it was sort of maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, that when it comes to family separating, whether it's a relationship ending or a divorce, suddenly this love that we have for these furry family members is possibly so much greater that it becomes a major issue for people. And I think that part of the problem in that for some of the couples that I work with, it can certainly be that both of them have an enormous love for the animal. And then there's some people that, and it's hard to say this because this is going to sound quite awful, but perhaps one person really loves the animals more and the other one's very aware of that. And in the other emotional challenges that come up in divorce, the animals become a great source of leverage or a way to hurt your partner, to sort of threaten, okay, well, I'm gonna keep the dog then, because they're angry about something else in relation to the relationship ending. It's a very easy thing to weaponize because of the emotional attachment we have, and because of the vague legal realities, which I'm sure we'll talk about shortly, that make it a very easy way to hurt your partner, intentionally or not. And even if there's no active kind of willful malice involved, just the love people have for their dogs. I mean, what I've been reflecting on a lot lately is that I think we as people have so much love in us, and it has to go somewhere. And especially if there aren't children in the picture, but even if there are, like in your case, the love that's in you, it's going to go to the animal. And that love, that emotional power, is going to lead to conflict and difficulties.
Yeah, I was quite worried about it actually, and I was thinking I want to ask you: is it the same? We call it best interest of the child. Is it the same thing with best interest for the animals? Is that the same?
So it very much depends on where you live. So in America right now, there are, and I'm going to lose track of a few states because the laws are always changing. So anyone who's listening needs to do their own research about the state that they live in. But in most states, animals are considered personal property, which means that legally, like on paper, if you end up, arguing over the dog, the person who can prove that they own the dog is the owner of the dog. In other words, they're no different than a lamp as far as the law is concerned. They're in the same category as any item in your home. But in several states, the laws are changing, and those states include California, Illinois, Alaska. I'm losing track now, but we can maybe pop it in the show notes, the states where the laws have changed. In Canada, in British Columbia, the laws have changed about dogs. The whole of Australia has recently changed their laws. Spain has also changed their laws. And in these places, animals are considered something other than property. And the language is a little bit different. It's a little bit nuanced. So in some places, they're considered items of a unique quality, which implies that, okay, yes, you own your animal, but you can't make the decision on custody purely based on who paid for the animal initially, for example. In other states or areas, animals are considered sentient beings. And in these places, when faced with a custody decision, the judge, the sort of person with the power, is allowed to look at the whole situation to determine where's actually the best for the dog. So in other words, we're allowed to consider what is the best long-term plan for the dog or the cat or the hedgehog when we're making when that decision is being made.
So what are the things that our listeners can understand what is in the best interest of? In my case, I had he was moving to a condo and I was moving to a small house with a small yard. And so the fit was Blue, our beloved Bernie's mountain dog. Well, he would probably, love this, like having his yard again and making sure, with more of a visitation type of thing, or whatever you call it, with his dad, right? And I want to talk to you about that too, the differences of how a dog can they transition easy from house to house, and we have a lot of cat lovers too. So is there a difference between how we set up these type of parenting arrangements or plans?
Yeah, definitely. So let me ask, and I'll answer your last question first, which
Mm-hmm.
is there a difference between dogs and cats? Absolutely. So dogs and cats, anyone who's had both or anyone who's had a cat will be aware of how naturally territorial cats are. They bond with their their property, with their territory, whether that's a farm that they live on or a small yard in a neighborhood, very, very strongly. And cats do not do well transitioning between homes. So for anybody listening here who has a cat and is facing a breakup and has to decide about the future of their cat, sharing them is not a good option. I mean, unless you have an exceptional cat that thinks it's a dog. And I've never met one of these cats in real life. I mean, I've seen videos of them, but I don't, they're very rare. They're like, hen's teeth. So I know lots of people who have tried to share their cats. And it's really sad because often what happens is the cats just get sick from stress after moving between territory back and forth. It is a selfish thing to do to put your cat in a shared custody situation. If you love your animal, if you love your cat, you won't do that to them. You will look at which of the two of you has the most ideal home set up for the cat, and who of you is able to be the best owner for that cat. And for cats especially, one of the factors to look at is if they have grown up having access to the outdoors, if they've been an indoor-outdoor cat, for example, it is very hard for those cats to move to a situation where they cannot go outside. So it's very hard. It's doable, but it's not ideal if they've lived in the suburbs to move to an apartment. They can move to a new house. There's always an adjustment period of a couple of weeks, and you have to sort of keep them inside and very gradually introduce them to their new territory. But that is sort of a baseline, is the most important thing, is really what is the best house situation for that cat. And then you go through an adjustment, and then the cat has the rest of its life with you, and it's usually okay. Dogs are different, of course. Dogs love adventures. Dogs love going places. Dogs are like, cool, let's go in the car and let's go anywhere. That's why we love them so much. They're always into doing things. Cats are into sleeping. Love them. So for dogs, it's a very big question. Like, what do you do with the dog? And many people will start the divorce or the custody or the ownership conversation sort of assuming that the best thing to do is to share the dog because we both love the dog a lot. And that does sound good. However, in the long term, for the dog's kind of mental well-being and general stress level, sharing them is not ideal in the long run. There are certain dogs who do adapt to it, but the phrase that I will often say is we have to see if the dog will tolerate it. We cannot imagine that it is the best thing for the dog to live in two homes. It's just not. And I was actually talking to a trainer yesterday who I'm also a service dog trainer. It's one of my little side things I love to do. And she raises, in addition to training dogs full time, she raises dogs every year. She raises a puppy to go to someone who's blind, to be a seeing eye dog. And we were talking about the work that I do. And I was saying how for her, she raises these dogs for a year and a half, and then they go and they live somewhere else. And it's very hard. And, it's always a bit heartbreaking to say goodbye, but the dogs are fine. They adjust and then they move through it. And anyone who's adopted a dog from a shelter also knows that dogs can adjust to a new life and a new situation. But when you add divorce into that conversation, a lot of people, because we really often see our dogs or our cats as our children in the divorce conversation. It just goes that way. I will, hear people say things like, but I raised him. Of course, I can't say goodbye to him. He's my child, or I'm his mother. He can't live without me. And none of those things are true. Any dog can move on from a person, even that they've had a strong bond with. There's just an adjustment period for them. So your dog, no matter whether or not the dog lives with you or your ex or whatever it is, provided that the dog is in a wonderful, loving home and all of its needs are being met, will be okay. So don't imagine that your dog has to stay in touch with both of you the rest of its life. That's just not how dogs operate. We think like that. Animals don't. So when people want to share their dog, these are some of the questions that I'll ask them to sort of determine what's realistic. So the first question that people can consider, if there's no children, now let's talk about children in a minute, because that adds another dimension. But let's say there's a situation where there are no human children. What then? So the first question I ask is, do you want to stay in touch with your ex for the next 5 or 10 years while you're sharing this animal with each other? And that is something I don't even like people to answer straight away. I say, sleep on it. Because especially if the divorce is a reasonable, amicable one, people will say, oh, no, it's fine. No, it's fine. I don't mind. We're friendly. We're on good terms. What usually makes sharing the dog not so nice for the people is when one of them gets into a new serious relationship. And then that new partner adds a whole other dimension. And there's often this realization that, hang on, we haven't actually broken up yet because we've been so attached over this dog for the last months or the last years, sharing it all the time. So that's something people need to consider quietly to themselves. Do you want your ex to know when you go on vacation? Do you want them to know when you're in a new relationship? Do you want to know if they buy a fancy new car, or, suddenly they're looking really sexy because they've lost a lot of weight? Like, there's a whole lot of things to think about. Do you want this person in your life? So that's the one question asked. What if you move? What if you decide to move, 7 hours away? What then? Some of my clients share their dog and they live 12 hours apart and they drive 6 hours in order to share their dog with each other. Do you want to put yourself in that situation? Really? Like, is that really the life you want for yourself? So that's from the human perspective, a question to chew on, let's say. From the dog perspective, we have to start the shared custody conversation with a very adult conversation, with some awareness that it might not work for the dog. So we cannot have this conversation saying, we're going to do it for the rest of the dog's life, signed and sealed no matter what. If you love your dog, you will not force your dog to live a life that's stressful for them, right? We would hope. So the way to wonder, how is this going for the dog, is to first start that knowing it's a 50-50 guess, depending on how the dog will handle it. And so when you are sharing the dog, the first thing that I recommend is to do longer visits rather than shorter ones. So something like, it depends. If you're talking 50-50, which in my opinion is kind of the worst thing to do for a dog, because then they kind of have no home and their life is always in motion. But for some people, that's all they'll tolerate. So then we can work with it. But if you are going to do 50-50, I recommend the longest visit as possible. So maybe 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 month, 1 month, 2 months, 2 months. But the hardest thing to do for dogs is like a 1 week, 1 week swap around, because then the dog is constantly in a state of adjusting into the other person's home. And if you do a 1 week, 1 week swap, you're seeing your ex every single week for years, right? So that's something else to think about. And then I always suggest that people sort of look at doing shared custody as a trial period first. We're just going to try it. Maybe for 3 months, maybe for 6 months. See how everybody's doing, including the two of you and including the dog, before you kind of commit to sticking with it. And really, in my opinion, you should always be doing it as like, let's check in every few months and see if the dog is still okay. And what a dog will look like when it's not okay is you will see changes in its behavior. Like maybe they start losing their appetite. A lot of dogs, when they know they're going to the other home, don't want to get in the car, which is really sad to see. And it's not because they don't love the other person. It's just because swapping houses is hard. It's not like they love this person and not you. But the transitions are challenging. Some dogs become a little bit aggressive, kind of snappy, grumpy. Seems like they're not acting like themselves. Some dogs become really, really, really hyper and like want to chew on everything, or won't stop barking at the neighbors and like kind of manic. And or they start chewing up the couch. Maybe they didn't do that before. So they will start to show in their change in behavior, which is the only way a dog can communicate that they're not having the best life moving back and forth. On the other hand, they might really be fine. Some dogs are fine with it, but we just need to accept that every dog is different, every breed of dog is different, and you have to look at each one and assess it as an individual.
Now, you've worked with clients. How many people are aware of what you've just said about? Because I'm putting myself back there 8, 9 years ago, going, oh, I wasn't even thinking what, like, about what you were saying. It was like an aha moment when you were talking. I went, you know, and I have kids, right? So we can talk about that after. But it's like, how many people actually understand what you just, like, when you're doing the mediation, or you're consulting with these people about that?
Not very many. Not That's why I do the work that I do,
Mm-hmm.
is to bring the awareness in. And like you mentioned in your opening, my background, I'm a dog behaviorist. I've been working with dogs for almost 30 years. And so I understand how dogs show their stress. I know how dogs react to situations that are not working for them. And that is why I do this work, is because of the thousands of dogs that I've worked with. And I don't think very many people are aware. I don't think very many divorce attorneys are aware, or mediators, which is why I offer the trainings that I do, because I'm trying to spread this awareness as much as possible. Because what I see happening in certain circles is, as the awareness of pet custody becomes something that people are talking about more, there's a real humanizing of the dog that's happening at the same time. So this sort of like, well, the dog is just, it's your other child, the fur children, which is very sweet. I mean, I call my dogs my kids, even though I have human kids. I have dog kids too. There's nothing wrong with that, but you can't like treat them literally as children in a divorce, because they're not. They're animals. We have to treat them as the best way possible for the animals, as animals, and as their certain temperament. You can't look at all dogs the same either, because there are Jack Russell Terriers, and there are Saint Bernards, and there are Rottweilers, and there are Golden Doodles, and all of these and everything in between, and they're all very, very different, because we have bred dogs to be very different creatures, and so you have to bring all of that into your awareness.
So let's just talk about the children a bit. I have heard people, or right, where I had a cousin who they divorced, and the dog would go when the child would go. So if it was 1 week with mom, the dog and the child would go with the mom, and then they'd pack up and the dog and the child would go with their dad. Is that also common with children involved?
Yeah, that is a very common thing. And so when there are children involved, the question around sharing the dog really changes, because first of all, the mom and the dad are going to be in contact, because there's a child involved. So there's no possibility that they're not in each other's lives. So that reality is out of it's not part of the conversation. What I to in a very broad sense, part of the reason that usually works better if there's a child involved is that the adults, are more focused on the child than the dog, which is easier on the dog. Dogs don't do well if they're the center of your household. It's a bit overwhelming for them. It's like they should be part of the household, but they shouldn't be the most important thing in it. It actually becomes stressful for them when you're sort of obsessed with them too much. That's where a lot of dog anxiety comes from, but that's a whole other conversation. So, so moving with the child works when there really is a good bond with the dog and the child. And then what will happen for those dogs is the child becomes kind of the steady thing in the dog's life, and they get the routine, and they move with the child. So this can work really, really well when it's a suitable breed and a suitable temperament dog to kind of bond and glue with a child and move back and forth. So that tends to work out much easier on a dog than doing a 1 week when there isn't a child in the picture. But what I do say to parents when I work with them, and some of the parent coordinators that I work with, is even when there is a child, you still have to assess how the dog is doing, because there are certain dogs who don't do well, who will start, again, hide when it's the day to transition. They start hiding in the bathroom. I had one client who, like, the dog used to hide under the bed and shake, for example, when he knew it was time to go to the other parent's house. because he wasn't particularly attached to the child. This dog was very attached to the mother in the house. And when the divorce happened, she was like, well, why don't we let Rover wasn't the dog's name, I'm just hiding the name. Why don't we let Rover move with the child, because it should be easier. And so for that particular dog, it didn't work. But for the dogs where the kid becomes their person, then it's very different, and that can work out really well. My very simple advice that goes a long way, whether there's children or not, is on the transition moment. So like when the dog arrives at the other home, is to go for a walk. Because rather than going inside and like eating or settling into the home, go for a walk for at least 20 minutes or so. Let the dog sniff, let the dog pee, kind of any stress they may or may not be feeling. The best way to dissipate it is through exercise. So a little walk and then into the house usually makes the whole situation a lot nicer for everybody.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think of when you're starting the divorce process and you have kids, and you're trying to look after the kids at the same time with your pets, and it can be all overwhelming. So these little tips, like even for the kids, like you could all go for a little walk, right? Like
Yes.
everybody's nervous system calms down. It's all the transition. So in your mediation practice, is there conflict with this a lot? Like, do you have a lot of things to work out with this stuff? Like, is it, it's not so simple?
No, it's not so simple. There's so many layers to pets. There's the practical question, there's the emotional question, or the emotion, maybe not the emotional question, but it's not an easy decision to make. And sometimes it involves one of the parties kind of agreeing to let the dog go. And sometimes that's the best result for everybody. I say to my clients, it's like, I know mediation can be hard, but if you can't mediate it, you're just going to let the lawyers decide for you or the judge decide for you, and that's even worse, because then you really have no say in what's happening for the dog. So it's heartbreaking work. Honestly, it's hard work, but it's so important. And even when it is hard, and certainly some situations are easier than others, but even the hardest, most challenging clients I've had, for whatever reason, I'm so happy I was able to help them make the decision that was the best one for them, and that they didn't sort of keep the fight going until they ended up in court and a judge was ruling about where the dog should go and where it should happen. So, it's not, I don't see people, I usually do sort of 2-hour mediations with my clients. It's not like we need to see each other 10 times or something, but it's challenging to work through who wants the dog and why, and who wanted the dog originally, and who's got the best situation for the dog. And and dialoguing, sometimes there's been affairs or there's been other sorts of betrayals that make it really hard to have an open, honest conversation with a person who you don't trust anymore. But the dog doesn't care if you had an affair. You can't make that decision. You can't leverage that to say, well, you had an affair, so I'm keeping the dog. If you're not the best owner of the two, or if the dog's really bonded to the other person. So we have to acknowledge all of those things. That's kind of the beauty of mediation, is you are allowed to say what needs to be said without bashing the other person. But sometimes before a decision can be reached, there's something people need to say, and it gives the opportunity to say that in a sort of a safe and respectful way, so that that hurdle is crossed, and then we can move forward to a decision.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, when I was writing my notes yesterday about talking with you, there's an element of grief here, right? Like divorcing or breakup, because a lot of common law couples out there too with animals. And that's alone is a lot of grief. But I was thinking, right, like we talked about the attachment to our animals. And so I just want to mention that it's difficult. And what you've said today is very important information for all of us to know. But to understand that for the ones that say, okay, well, it'd probably be best that the cat lives with you or the dog lives with you, there's a huge element of grief there, right?
Huge, huge. Enormous grief, and on multiple levels, because for some people it might be saying goodbye to the animal, and for a lot of people saying goodbye to the animal also means the relationship is really over, because that might be the thing that was sort of keeping them tied together. And there's sort of so there's the literal animal, and there's everything the animal represents, and what we thought when we got it, the place our relationship was in when we brought this animal together, into our new relationship, and now it's gone, and the relationship is over as well. And there's huge grief with that. And that's part of the why I have really honest conversations with my clients who do want to share their dog, because for some people they only actually mourn the relationship when they stop sharing the dog. It's very interesting, and that's why I can make it a very angry thing, which ties into this pattern that is more common than you would imagine, that people will share the dog till there's a new relationship, and that is what kind of pops a bubble people didn't even know was there. And then it's a hard one to yeah, it's a challenging thing to get through. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was thinking. What are your thoughts on people that have visitations? Like, I've seen that where it's like the dog's primary with one person, and then they say, okay, well, on Sundays your dad's gonna walk him or take him for the day. Is that also something they could put in the arrangement? Again, as you've pointed out very, very well today, is how long do you want to stay connected with this person? Because that's really important to know, right? But I have a feeling, or you can tell me, that's some people may want to start off that way without even knowing the full picture. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if people, let's take your example. Let's say it's an amicable breakup, and the dog's going with the mom in this example, and dad wants to come every Sunday and take him for a walk. So if people want to do that, what they should be cognizant of and agree and be adult enough to say at the time, and be aware of the future, is if the person with primary custody wants to stop the visitations, they have to have the right to say so, because otherwise you're stuck with this person kind of dropping in every single Sunday for however many years. And what if you don't want that anymore? What if it's too hard for whatever reason, because you have a new relationship, or because you just actually don't want to see them anymore? And so for your own sanity, I suggest that be built in to that conversation. So when I work with lawyers, and I bring up this hypothetical, they all go, oh, no, you can't do visitations. No, because then, for exactly this reason, you don't have a way to have this person not in your life if you choose that. And you have to be allowed not to see this person anymore if you don't want to. So some ideas that work for some people work better, again, if it's an amicable situation, is that if you go on vacation, your dog goes with your ex rather than like going to a kennel or something. So that sort of thing, I say for dogs, is like going to summer camp. It's like, oh, cool, I'm at your house, and hang out, and that's quite fun for the dogs. That's not the same as like swapping every week to go be with the person. So that's a compromise, that the dog can stay in the person's life. One client I worked with, they were quite sweet with each other, and every summer he goes on a 2-week hiking trip, which he's done for years. And he said, I would really love to take the dog. He said, that's great. He loves it. So every summer he takes the dog on this trip, and that's kind of been their thing. So that's a way for it to happen. For visitations, if people do want to do it, it's better for the dog. Like, you don't sort of want to drop in randomly every 6 months and take the dog for a walk. That's a little bit unnerving for them, because they're like really happy to see you and then you disappear again, and that's weird for them. So that I don't recommend, but it's different if they stay at your house for a few days. So in general, I try to discourage like weekly visits, because it gets tiresome for people. It just does. So it's better to look at other ways that maybe there can still be some connection to a dog, rather than setting that up, because then think about it. They've got to know your schedule. What if you're away for the weekend? But where are you going? What time? What if you have a bunch of people over at your house and your ex knocks? It can get uncomfortable, and you don't want to set yourself up for that if there's a way around it.
I love that though. Like you can put like, I'm going away for 2 to 3 weeks. So instead of going to a kennel, and most adults can handle this type of transition, right? Like you see them, the dog's going to their old parent, the other parent. So it seems more doable than what we've talked about. Another question I had quickly is, do you advise, young couples to talk about this before they, because it's pretty common. The society seems to be pretty common. They get together, they either get married and then they get the dog, they get the cat and the dog, and then, and then maybe they have kids, depending, right? So is it, I don't know if there's a place I thought there was a place in Montreal, SPCA up there that will have them write down, like, if something happens to you guys, like you break up, do you have an idea of what you want? Have you heard of this, or do you agree with this?
It's a pet nump. Yes, pet numps are the best thing to do. It's a very, very smart thing to do for anyone who is adopting a dog or a cat, or purchasing one. And anytime you're bringing a new animal into your life, I highly, highly recommend that precisely at the time when everything's fine between you and you have no intention of breaking up. And hopefully it's never a piece of paper you need to look at ever again. But if you write down together and you agree, and you can download forms online, where they're sort of, have all the framework written out for you, but that you have something written down that says, if we split up, the dog is going with this person or the cat is going with this person. Because when nobody ever thinks they're going to break up, and nobody ever thinks it'll get ugly, and hopefully it never does. But why not just write it down? You can save yourself money and heartache and so much time by having that conversation, so that there's just no debate about it later on down the line. I highly recommend it. And I do a lot of work at shelters, because I'm trying to advocate that all shelters have people fill this in when they adopt a dog as a couple. There's some statistics where, like, at certain shelters, one of the organizations in England I work with, like 40% of the dogs that end up at the shelters because of a divorce. That's why they get dumped, or surrendered is a better word. So yes, pet numps are highly recommended, and a really smart thing to do for anybody.
I also just want to point out, because I'm a grief counselor, right? And I just want to say, as you know, I told you about how we adopted Nico, our new cat. But I said to my daughters, who are young adults now, and I said, also, just for our listeners, also have a plan in case something happens to you. Because I said to the girls, they're young adults. I said, if anything happens to me, you guys are going to take responsibility of Nico, correct? And, I don't need a paper with them, because I know they'll follow through. But it's just something else for everybody to think about, right? Like, these ownerships. Another thing I want to point out is the average length of marriages, I think, are 8 to 10 years. And so cats can live to 15, 16. Dogs can live till 15. My aunt and uncle had a lab that lived till 15. So just something for everyone to think about, right?
Yep. If something should happen to you, whether you're single or you're in a relationship, you should have it written down and visible and accessible, like on your refrigerator, and your neighbors should know, your family should know. If you end up in an accident or something happens, what is happening with your animal, so that it doesn't get taken to the SPCA, or any sort of shelter. But it's crucial that it's written down. And when it comes to divorcing couples, in the agreements I write up, if one person is getting sole custody of the dog, part of that agreement always says, if the person who does get custody cannot keep the dog, it will automatically go to the other one, so that there's no chance of someone, because it happens, right? People will like vindictively give the dog away. Or I know of many stories where people have put dogs to sleep, just to really do something horrible to their ex. Those are obviously very extreme situations. But just for everyone's peace of mind, you want to know that if something happened and your ex can't keep the dog, he's not going to give it to his sister or to the neighbor. It's going to come back to you. And that's really important also.
So before we wrap up, is there anything that like we could talk for hours, but is there anything like, because there's so much information here, but is there anything that we missed out that is important just for today's conversation?
I think the last thing I'd like to leave people with is that if you're going through a breakup, have the conversation about the dog or the cat as soon as possible. Don't leave it till the end. A lot of people will kind of deal with everything else first and kind of say, oh, we'll deal with the dog. But there's emotions there with the dog that are probably bigger than you're acknowledging. And the longer you leave it, the harder it is. So if you address it while you're still in a sort of good working dialogue about what's going to happen, it makes the rest of the conversation less complicated. And also, the sooner you decide about the dog, you minimize the chance of it being leveraged with other things. You don't want to make the decision based on leverage. You want to make the decision based on the animal's best interest. And I can tell people now, I can plug my book now, because in my book, which is called Who Keeps the Dog, I write about that quite extensively and specifically. So this is a really easy read. It's written for people going through a divorce. It's also written for divorce professionals so they can advise their clients better. And it's a really important book for anyone who's going through this, which is a lot of people out there. So deal with it as soon as possible. Try to mediate it through it. Don't fight over it so bad that a judge has to decide for you, if at all possible.
I was just thinking, I usually ask every guest before, like for someone who's just separated, whether they left or were left, what's the best advice you'd give them? You just answered it all. So perfect. I think the work that you're doing, considering I felt that 8 years ago, is so vital. You're filling in gaps that are really necessary, but also because of your dog behavioral for 30 years, like that expertise is huge, right? And I think we have to start thinking about the animals more than ourselves,
You said
and
it. Yep.
and
That's
as a
exactly it. Yeah.
and as as an animal lover, though, it's just it's really important to think of them more than ourselves. And I think the problem with divorce is we get so emotionally charged. And so I love the work you're doing, and I hope everybody grabs the book. And you also do training for professionals all over the world, I think, correct?
Yeah, I just finished training a wonderful law firm in Australia. They had all their family lawyers go through my training. So I do. It's around the world. I have trainings for divorce professionals and also dog professionals, for vets, for dog trainers, dog behaviorists, because people often ask people who work with dogs what to do. They ask for advice. So I train both of those groups about the best interests of the animals, so that people can, because so many people love dogs, right? They love animals. We so many people do, but that doesn't mean they know the right thing to do. So you can empower yourself, and all that information is available on my website. And I'm so passionate about it. I love sharing what I know with the world, so that we can do right by our dogs and our cats and our horses.
And do you do, yeah, and chipmunks or hedgehogs, or one of my daughter's friend had a what's the little prickly thing?
Yeah,
Um,
hedgehog.
yeah, it was a hedgehog and felt like it was really cute. But anyways, that's beside the point. So do you do do you do mediation? Is it worldwide as well because of what your specialty is?
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I do. So I definitely do. I work around the world. I'm accredited to do mediation around the world. So I work literally all over the place. I do my mediations on Zoom, so it doesn't matter where you are. And anyone who would like to maybe work with me, they can visit my website, and we can schedule just a half an hour introductory chat, and I can just explain kind of what I do, and just to see if they would like to work with me. And for people who are not, I also work with clients who are not able to mediate. Maybe sometimes there's issues of domestic violence, or for various reasons, mediation isn't possible. And then for those people, I just work as a consultant. So I still advise them about kind of the best options and what to look at and why. And then for the people who who are able to, we just do straight up mediation together and come to that, resolve it in that way.
Well, thanks for sharing your wonderful, informative, great information. It's great work you're doing, and thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had a really great time. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for joining today's discussion with our divorce expert. Check out the show notes for more about our guest. If you're finding value in our podcast, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and our YouTube channel at Divorce Workshop. Share your questions, comments, or guest suggestions. We'd love to hear from you. For a comprehensive divorce guide, check out our Just Separated workbook on Amazon worldwide. This workbook covers everything from emotions and co-parenting to finances, legal insights, and recovery, a must-have for anyone navigating separation or divorce.